Today on The State of Us, why we ignore our friends to look at our phones, and honest communication in the age of ghosting. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined, of course, today by our friendly redneck liberal, Mr. Lance L. Jackson. And we're going to talk today about two things that have become very prevalent in the age of digital communication. And one of those is from the viewpoint of a behavioral economist who's answering questions on a new digital faux pas and the importance of learning by doing. Also, we're going to look at why it can be awkward to deliver rejection, but it's better if we do it instead of avoiding it. And yes, those are both respectively about ignoring friends to look at our phones and how we can do a better job of communicating in the age of ghosting. And for those of you that don't know, ghosting is basically the act of just simply not replying to somebody, right? They send you a communication or they ask you a question and you never send any response. You just fade away. So, Lance, before we dive in though, what is the word of the day?
Well, this has been done by some of the people that we're going to talk about today, and we're going to do it ourselves. And we ask you, the audience, to participate. We're going to practice some sociometry. Sociometry is a noun. It is 5 syllables, SOCIOMETRY. And it is a technique for measuring what members of a group perceive, think, and feel about other members of the group. So, sociometry, we're all going to play a role here. The articles do it. Justin and I are going to do it. And as the listening audience, you tell us your feelings. Send us an email at podcast@thestateofus.org and let us know what you think about people who do these things that we're going to talk about. We're going to do some sociometry of our own.
So as a avid smartphone user, I think Lance is best positioned to tell us about what can be gleaned from why do we do this, right? Where, I mean, especially right now, because it's an odd phenomenon. The pandemic, we maybe didn't see people for a while. Now you see them again and you're talking and all of a sudden they stop and look at their phone.
Yeah. So why do people phub us? And I didn't
phub.
Phub us. Yes.
What is phub?
Phub is phone snubbing, or known as phubbing. It is a word that I learned today. And
how do we spell phubbing?
Phubbing is PHUBBING.
Phubbing.
Or if you do it, it is the verb to phub, FHUB.
To phub.
Yes.
Have you ever been phubbed?
I have been phubbed, and I
mean, you work around young people,
and I react well. It mostly has to do with people that I care about the most, that upset me the most. And it says most of us perceive phubbing to be rude, and it can have serious repercussions for the level of satisfaction in a friendship. But this psychologist goes on and says, phubbing has more to do with the phubber's personality than with their lack of interest in the conversation. So that makes sense to me because as I read on, it tells us that basically people that are more likely to be depressed or to be socially anxious phub their friends more than others. That makes sense because it's like, oh my gosh, somebody's trying to get a hold of me. I don't want to make them mad. I need to respond to them. So it's not that I don't really care about what you're having to say, because I do like the conversation we're having. But if I don't respond to this person, then they're going to be mad at me. So I'm going to multitask and answer them while I'm listening to you. And that way I make everybody happy. So, for those, what I've referred to in my age of pleasers, those people that live to please others, that's how they feel good about themselves, is to please others. They are more likely to phub, and they're doing that because they don't want to make anybody mad at them. They're not doing it because they're not involved in your conversation. It's just that they're trying to have multiple conversations at the same time. But for those of us who have the personality that if I'm talking to you, you have my full attention, that I will give you my full attention. Everything else, my phone goes off, I let it sit there, unless there's a down moment or something. For the most part, I try to let my phone sit there, because if I'm having a personal conversation, then I will give you my entire attention. And then when I do this, I give my full attention to my phone. And I've been told by the younger generation, well, that just means you can't multitask. And I say, no, that's because you're rude, because when you can't multitask either, you're just giving 50% of your attention to your phone and 50% to the in-person conversation that you're having. And I find it interesting that this doctor says that it's not being rude. It has more to do with the person who you're having the conversation with and how they interact socially. That it's not a reflection on you, or that your story is boring, or that they're not enjoying the conversation, but it's their lack of confidence in having personal relationships that causes people to fub.
So, fun fact, because multitasking, right, is the common
It's the common denominator.
The common denominator of people saying, well, you just can't multitask. The belief, right, that we're more efficient if we're doing multiple things at the same time. And on March 10th of this year, the Cleveland Clinic, I don't know if, our listeners have ever heard of them or not, but generally a relatively reputable source in the
one of my daughters
field of research and medicine.
For the Cleveland Clinic, the biggest healthcare provider in the United States and the biggest employer in the state of Ohio.
Well, they released an article, Lance, in their mental health section this year entitled Why Multitasking Doesn't Work. Studies show it makes us less efficient and more prone to errors. And in fact, one study found that just 2.5% of people are able to multitask efficiently. For the rest of us, our attempts to do multiple activities at once aren't actually that. And this is something that you and I talked about quite a while ago that I brought up, because in my own personal studies of psychology, what we're actually doing, and you'll find this in multiple well-documented instances, is called task switching, which basically means you're not actually, because multitasking, to be clear, right, would be the ability to simultaneously do more than one task at a time. And in most cases, as in 97.5% of cases, what you're doing is task switching. Or in other words, as this doctor puts it, this neuropsychologist, when we think we're multitasking, most often we aren't really doing two things or more at once, but instead we're doing individual actions in rapid succession, which basically predispositions us to a great number of errors, because our minds are not wired. Most people, again, 97.5% of people, are not wired to be able to effectively, super quickly change between different tasks. We tend to do tasks the best if we can dedicate some time to them and actually focus and do the task and then move on to another task. And the other thing is, when you read more about these studies, and this is an article, that again, our listeners are welcome to read. We'll link it at thestateofus.org. It can actually hinder your performance. Studies show that when our brain, and this is the Cleveland Clinic again, is constantly switching gears to bounce back and forth between tasks, especially when those tasks are complex and require our active attention, like listening, we become less efficient and more likely to make a mistake. This might not be as apparent or impactful when you're doing tasks that are simple and routine, like listening to music while walking or folding laundry while watching TV, but when the stakes are higher and the tasks are more complex, trying to multitask can negatively impact our lives and even be dangerous. It makes it harder for us to give our full attention to one thing. For example, in studies attempting to complete additional tasks during a driving simulation led to poorer driving performance. Other studies suggest that people who frequently media multitask, like listening to music while checking email or scrolling through social media while watching a movie, are more distracted and less able to focus their attention even when they're performing only one task. So the big key here is the more we do it, the worse it makes our ability then when we need to focus. So I think this is a huge thing, because it's like, well, how do we get from, ignoring people in a conversation, our friends, to look at our phones to this? Well, this is what we're talking about. One of the reasons it happens isn't just people's personality. It's because the more that we try to convince ourselves that we're being productive by, well, yeah, I'm listening to you, but I'm also doing this. Well, no, what you're actually doing is tuning in and out of the conversation in rapid succession, which means that you're not getting the whole picture, and tends to upset the person that you're talking to. So, I don't think that there's a real win there, Lance.
No, I agree with you. And you need to tell us, right? Because we're doing some sociometry today. So you need to tell us, where do you fall on this pendulum? Do you agree with me? And that is that, it's really, really hard. As Justin said, 97.5% of people can't do it. Or are you putting yourself in that 2.5% that you can do this? But the other question is, well, what do you do about it? Right? I mean, to solve either problem, whether you're phubbing or switching gears and really not giving people your full attention, which means you're not getting the innuendo, you're not getting the nonverbal communication that sometimes is very important, that I feel is important in a personal conversation versus texting or whatever form of social media you're using. But, a couple of solutions, real easy, right? Turn off your text and email notifications. That way you're not tempted. Put your phone in airplane mode, which I can't do because I'm not sure how you do that. And just put your screen down and turn it over. And that lets everybody know in the conversation that your attention is full. And maybe if you take the lead, they'll turn their phones over as well. And then you can have that fulfilling conversation that you all, it would seem to me, are looking for, because you decided to meet and get together. And in today's world, that's a huge thing. And we found out during the pandemic that we are creatures that need that one of the major problems of isolating in place and trying to stay healthy was that we missed that social interaction that we need with others. Even if we have Zoom, even if we have all the different things that came out that we started to use to stay in touch with one another and still see each other and talk to each other in live time, we found out, no matter how great that was, it didn't take the place of sitting across from one another, which is why outdoor dining got big. And when the summer months got nice, my family went out on the porch and sat outside and socially distanced before the vaccine, because we needed that personal human interaction.
And the reality is, it may not seem like a big deal, but the whole point of talking about this is to say, it's amazing how, because we do that so frequently, it has the ability to impact so many components of our life. And before we transition to talking about ghosting, Lance, I highlighted something here, put it up on the screen. You want to read that to our listeners? Because you're our education guy. So what this is from the Cleveland Clinic again. What do they tell us about what this can do to our learning?
Well, it says it can also affect our ability to learn, because in order to learn, we need to be able to focus. Wow. How many times, if you were in the classroom, did you hear a teacher say that to you? You just need to focus, Johnny. You need to focus, Susie. Well, goes on to say, quote, the more we multitask, the less we actually accomplish, because we slowly lose our ability to focus enough to learn. Sounds like what happened in my classroom on a daily basis each period, either to the entire class or to individuals. You need to focus. You're not with us right now. You're gazing out the window. You're doing this. Okay. Whatever you need to do to focus. Now, that doesn't mean, because yours truly, all right, transparency here, for me to focus, I doodle. So there are things that you can do which help you focus. For me, it is drawing and shading and coloring in lines, because when I do that, I learn better. The movement, that's that kinesthetic idea of using my hands while I'm listening, improve my listening and thinking ability.
And learning and focusing are often achieved through listening, which at the end of the day, you can't do very well if you're looking down at your phone while you're supposed to be in a conversation with somebody. So what about ghosting, this idea that we're just going to cut people out, not talk to them? What can we do about that? Is it really the best approach? I mean, nobody who likes conflict, right? Not a lot of people. So what can we do
if we avoid conflict, our life's better, right?
Well, maybe, but to find out, you'll have to keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. I don't know, Lance, how you could be downbeat on our upbeat State of Us music. So I think it keeps the mood in the right place, which is to say that none of us are perfect. I mean, Lance and I are talking about this. I mean, I know I have a problem checking my phone sometimes when people are talking. I've been working on the past year or two trying to get better at that. To Lance's point about, how people work and function. Sometimes people think that when I'm staring away while they are talking to me, that I am not with them. But I do have trouble not allowing my mind to do the branching thing, right? Which is when people are talking, it leads to all these other things that I can think of that are relevant. But that's a lot different than ignoring the conversation and not getting value from it, which are different things. And so to Lance's point at the end of the last segment, I think the important thing is that the more we can recognize our own behaviors, and I think this is just true across the board, the more likely we are to do a better job at managing them, right? Because there's lots of things that are good in some circumstances and bad in other circumstances. And I think that's going to be true of ghosting as well, which we have to talk about. Because as people, we're wired to try to avoid difficulty. I mean, Lance and I have talked about that. The evolution of nature is, what's the path of least resistance. But as we have also learned over the years on this show and talked with our listeners, is that that's not always the best path to take. Yes, we've adapted to do that frequently, and that's where we run into ghosting, right? Is this idea that basically I am now going to have to deny somebody. I either don't want to talk to them anymore. I don't want to offer them the job, or I don't want the job, or whatever. And so rather than do the uncomfortable thing, which would be to talk to that person and tell them,
the conversation.
Right. This is what's happening. I am simply going to take the path of least resistance, which is to just avoid and say and do nothing to indicate to them why I have disappeared, which sounds like it would be better. But we learned through this article, Lance, right, that not only is it bad for the other person, because if you've ever been on the end of ghosting for any reason, professional, personal, whatever, you know that it's very upsetting, to not know why someone else has suddenly just not responded to you and will not take your communications. It's the ultimate feeling of rejection and neglect, and nobody likes feeling those things. But it's actually also bad for the person doing it, right, Lance?
No, that's true. And to your point, in a survey in 2021 of 500 job seekers and 500 employers, 77% of candidates had experienced ghosting from prospective employers, while 28% of candidates acknowledged doing the ghosting themselves. So this is something that, if it hasn't happened to you, you're in the minority. I mean, this is pretty prevalent out there. But when they do that, it can be disconcerting and maddening. And we also know that, and I remember this study back in 1970 by a psychologist, that mothers were engaging with their babies and then suddenly left the room. And then they just watched the children. You're saying, oh, this is horrible. No, it was just an experiment. But it said the children became visibly distraught. And it was because we as human beings innately crave validation. Whatever your age, it's normal to want responses. So it's like we all want this. And so we avoid I'll avoid I don't want to have this. I really don't, want to hurt these people's feelings. So I just won't say anything at all. Well, then you're not getting to express your opinions and your thoughts, which then makes it churn and boil in your stomach or in your mind, which takes you away from being happy or moving on. You're like, oh, I wonder how they're doing. And, am I doing the right thing? And all this other consternation that you have. But for them, their mind is now racing and they're not any better. So if you really want to do the right thing, you need to talk to that person.
Exactly. I was going to say that's, as you're speaking, it's like, well, yeah, not only are you not letting the other person move on, even though you think maybe that you've moved on, what you've done is something that it's almost the opposite of what you wanted to do. You've burned a bridge, right? Because now, well, maybe I'm not going to go here because I might see that person, right? It's like, what? You're not going to go to that store anymore because you might see that person? I mean, that's terrible, no, maybe you're not going to be best friends, right? And hang out and talk and like whatever, but it shouldn't be something that you have to change your life routine to avoid. And I think people don't realize, because the assumption is that it's easier, how many things you then allow your life, that you change in your life to hold up the effort of ghosting. Well, I'm not going to like anything they post anymore either, because then they might know that I'm looking at their stuff. It's like, again, what? You can, just because whatever didn't work out, the job, the relationship, the whatever it might be, why does that mean that we have to cut people out like that? I mean, our culture is programmed around the idea of endings, right? Wrapping things up. And we're very uncomfortable when things don't wrap up the way that we think they ought to. But we're even more uncomfortable when things don't get wrapped up at all. And I mean, just take TV shows, right? A simple thing. There is nothing more frustrating to me than when there's some new something out, right, that you're watching, and it's like, oh, this is really good. And, for whatever reason, they've decided, well, the show can't go on. But they don't do anything to wrap it up. It's just, well, it's just over. We're not coming back. We're not wrapping it up. It's just done. And I think the other thing is, we can control our own behavior, but we can't control that of others. And maybe the thing to do if you're being ghosted is to remind yourself that, it's often the other person's trying to avoid being uncomfortable as much as you might be uncomfortable. And we often don't get the nice wrapped up endings in a bow maybe that we'd all like.
Well, and what are we all clamoring for in our lives, right? We want more time. And the article goes on to point out that proactively communicating a rejection can also save you time. Because if you do it once and you do it, it takes no more effort to say something quickly and clearly versus not replying. And instead of it constantly being on your mind, you just say, hey, you know what? I met with you. And because I took the time to meet with you, you deserve a response from me. Here's my response. Bam, do it once, you're done with it, you move on. So it saves us time. And I think that's an important part, because all of us are looking for more time. So if we make that closing comment, as we said before, then you can move on. And, people are like, well, people are going to think I'm mean then because I'm telling people, I'm rejecting people. Well, no, because if you're the way you do it, it can also be possible to maintain your own self-respect and people still liking you when you have to develop these things, because they're like, hey, that person was honest with me. I can believe that person. So now when you have an interaction with them, they don't have to like the fact of what you told them, but they respect you because you told them the truth. And then the next time they're looking for a truthful response to a situation, who are they going to come to? They're going to come to you. Not because, oh, you rejected me. No, because you were honest with me. And I've had 3 people lie to me and then ghost me. You're at least were honest with me. So I'm going to come back to you because you're honest. And I think that's something that I learned way back from my grandfather. It's like, it's real easy, right? The hard thing to do is to lie, because then you have to say another lie and another, and then you got to remember what you said and who you said it to. if somebody asks you a question and you tell them the truth, and then somebody else comes and asks you that same question and you give them the same answer, you only have to remember one answer. You told them the truth. And then people will start to respect you because they know that you are honest. Wow, that's kind of what we are. We say here, we're honest, open opinions. And it's like, you don't maybe like everything we say or what we stand for or whatever, but you know that we're being honest. And if you ask us a direct question, we will give you a direct answer. And that just makes everything so much better for society and for people, because then there's no innuendos and you're not worried about, well, okay, they answered me. Is that the way they really feel? Right? How many times have you thought that? Is that the way that person really feels? And, so sometimes, and you can do it in a way where you let them down easily, but you do it. You don't run from it. You don't solve any problem from running from it. That's not, I guess it is a solution, but to me it means no, the problem still exists. It just gets worse.
Well, and the self-respect component, right? We forget that, yes, others will respect you for doing it. Most people will, and they'll appreciate some kind of conclusion. You'll appreciate that you did the more challenging task, right? I mean, that's part of why great successes that required a lot of hard work that you put in, and then it ended up the way that you needed it to. That's why you feel good about those things, because it's like, yeah, I put in the time, I put in the effort, and you know what? It worked out, or it didn't, but I know that I did what could be done. I controlled what was within my control. And this is an example of, sloughing that off and ultimately causing us more problems and pain for us and others in the process. And so I think it's a huge component. But what can be done at a societal level to address ghosting and phubbing, which is looking at your phone while in the company of friends, family, etc.? What do we do about those things? Because they ripple through society, and they're a new, right? A lot of things aren't new, but they're a new phenomenon that society is dealing with or trying to figure out. What do we do about these things?
In your sociometric, if you believe like we do that this is a problem, then how do we fix it? What are the solutions, right?
Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. Phubbing, which is the act of basically looking at your phone while in a conversation with friends or family, and ghosting, which is essentially just quitting the communication process with somebody. And both the things that, we rationalize and have good reasons for. And I think things that, being honest, right? Have I done both of those things? Sure. Has pretty much everybody done those things? Absolutely. Should we work to minimize how much we do them? Yes.
And people did them before social media. This is, but it's been exacerbated, been blown out of proportion with social media, because we have so much more contact with people that's why it's had, I think, a greater effect on us.
Yeah. I mean, the whole component of having the ability to communicate with basically anybody in your life in the palm of your hand, that has profound impact. And that's why, I wish I could say there's a lot of hope for adults. And I think if adults make the conscious choices that we've talked about, turning off notifications, minimizing distractions, you can set controls on your screen time. And actually, Bradley, our producer, shout out to him, showed me recently that one thing he has done that he has found is helpful is he has removed every app that is a distractor from the home screen of his phone. So the apps are still on the phone, but the only way to get to them is to slide to the app list and search for the app that you need. And you've added at least 2 steps that slow down the process of getting to what you were after by, maybe 2 or 3 seconds. Well, as we talked about just a couple months ago with social media posts, the studies that have been done where you cause a delay between when you thought about doing something and when you were actually able to do it, even if it's only a few seconds, has a profound impact on what you're likely to do, because it's enough time for your brain, right? The good part of your brain, the smart part, to catch up with the instinct part and say, whoa, maybe we don't need to do this right now, right? And I think that that's something that, whether it's ghosting, right, whether it's ignoring friends that look at our phone, if we aren't able to instantly do whatever it is that we wish to do, we are forced to give things more thought. And I think ghosting, Lance, is a good example of something that stems from not giving something a lot of thought, right? Oh, I don't know what to do about this. I'm just not going to do anything, and I'm going to move on. And it's that anxiety ridden, I don't want to deal with it, so I'm not going to deal with it, so I'm done. And if you are forced to sit there and say, well, give me 2 or 3 minutes on why you don't think you should do this, it's amazing how people can talk themselves out of it then and say, well, yeah, okay, I guess I probably should, X, Y, Z. And it's like, it's not that we don't know, right? It's that technology, unfortunately, and the companies that run them, they're in the business of making money. And the way they make money is by not letting the smart part of your brain kick in. They want to keep you in instant, right? From this to this to this to this to this, so that you don't have time to pull back and process and think. And so I think the screen time caps are a huge thing for adults and children. Obviously, if you have a child, you can just do that. They don't need to agree to it. You just put it in place, cap their usage at 2 hours a day, and, you're done. You use your device for 2 hours a day and you can't use it after that because it's locked out. The only option is, your 911 dialer. You can call somebody, if you need help, but that's about it.
You're exactly right. And another solution is, here's the problem first, right? The problem is many people, according to one of the doctors interviewed for this article, do ghosting because they don't know what to say. Well, this is a tough conversation and I don't know what to say. So I can see that, there have been many difficult conversations I've had and I can't even remember necessarily what I said, but I've had people come back to me and say, hey, I really appreciate, you giving me the time to talk about that difficult situation. See, so the words didn't matter. That's number one, is you don't necessarily have to worry about what it is you're saying. Just giving people the time of day by responding to them sometimes is enough to be positive. But the other thing this doctor said is, okay, since it's going to be difficult to respond, then write down some items that you could use in these situations that seem to be popping up for you. And so, okay, yes, it's a quote canned response, but as we've shown today in today's show, to all involved, yourself and the person you're talking to respond in some manner is typically better than ghosting. Plus, you feel better because it's not hanging over your head still thinking about, what do I need to say? Perfect example today. I have a letter of recommendation I need to write. I've been putting it off and putting it off. Okay. I just need to sit down and get it done, because when I get it done, even if it's not my best work, it will be good and it will make the person who's waiting for it feel better. They're anxious right now because I promised it to them 2 days ago and they still don't have it. And so I need to just sit down and do it. I have every intention. I want to do a really good job because I like this person and they've done all the back work that I've asked for and put it in my hands. I need to get off my butt, so to speak, and just get it done, because they will feel better and I will feel better because it's been on my mind now for 3 days. And I need to just do it this afternoon and hand it to them at practice. And then they're not worrying about it. So we're both going to be better off, even if it's not the very best letter of recommendation that I've ever written.
Yeah, I think sometimes and the article does a good job of pointing that out, we underestimate the value of just being present, right? And that's ghosting and phubbing, both. The value of just being there, right? Like Lance said, just the sheer fact that you have taken the time to communicate to them, I appreciate your interest in whatever this is, or, I appreciate what we've been through or whatever, right? But, I've decided to go a different direction. Okay, it's better to know. I mean, I think that's one of those things, right? It's age-old philosophical question. Is it better to know or not know? And in the case of rejection, I think it's better to know, right? Now, and they talk about there's a fine line there, though. Don't dive into every detail about why you made the decision. I think people tend to think that the thing to do is to justify it, right? To make excuses or explain or no, not necessarily, The more important thing is that you're doing it, because when people want to look for the details is when they get no answer, because then they overanalyze and they start, well, was it this or this or this or what was it? And it's like at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter what it was. It just matters that that, this is not what we're going to do. We're going a different direction. Because I was explaining to somebody the other day, they said, well, for these reasons, I don't want to talk about this thing, with these people, because they're going to ask me these questions. Those questions will be tough, And my whole thing was, well, then I'm not sure you're making the right decision, No, you don't have to agree with what everybody's saying. You're not required to justify yourself to them. But if you're not comfortable doing that, then you may not be making the right decision anyway, And I think that that's a big thing that we don't take into account. If you're not in the position to be able to tell this other human being why you're about to do what you're going to do, or that you're doing it. I mean, in the ghosting case, that's even what you're going to do. I don't know. Then are you making the right decision? So, and maybe you are.
No, good point.
But if you can't answer that, then, I think it's worth further reflection, I guess is the point.
Gives you pause to think. Yes.
So, but that's what we're about here on The State of Us, right? Is room to think, to express honestly and openly.
We're just here to try to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And again, we'd like for you to be a part of our sociometric study today and tell us what you think about. We've given you a lot of different things: phubbing, ghosting, multitasking. Let us know where you are and we'll collect that information and get back to you. And when you have those conversations with other people, like we hope you do, and they say, well, where can we find this interesting show to listen to and this mind-blowing experience that we call The State of Us? Tell them, well, we're on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us is both a podcast and syndicated radio program. New episodes Tuesdays and Thursdays for the podcast. The same episodes can be heard on the weekends in select talk radio markets around the country, AM, FM, radio stations. I think Lance takes it handedly today. I didn't even say the word.
I threw a no-hitter.
Yeah.
Since, we are at the end of baseball season.
That multi-syllable.
I did. 5-syllable word.
Yeah. So see, he knows now. He's on the lookout. We're going to have to revise the rules.
Well, I felt like a win. I mean, I gave you a briefer word an episode or two ago, a 1-syllable word that lets you, end a tie or get a win. But I felt like winning today. So I went with the big 5-syllable
so
word.
I changed it. Okay. Lance takes it for The State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio. I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our producer, Bradley Butch, and thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.